The Dallas Stars have just won the Chris Tanev sweepstakes, trading a second-round pick, a mid-tier prospect, and a conditional pick for Tanev services. How does this impact the Jets, and might it help Winnipeg in their quest to find a defender? All coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Stay tuned to hear more about how GameTime can save you time and money on your next major ticket purchase. Now, like I said, the Dallas Stars have just completed the acquisition of Chris Tanev. Was a relatively late-breaking deal here, and of course, it would just happen to happen right before I record tonight's episode, so that's pretty handy, I suppose. And for Winnipeg, this actually has some pretty big, I would say, implications for the Jets, right? Winnipeg's in the market for a defender of some sort. Chris Tanev was probably one of my most wanted targets, and based on the price of what we were seeing out there, I thought, the Jets might actually have a pretty good chance of bringing Tanev in. I believe his family is pretty in love with, the city of Winnipeg. By all accounts, Chris would be coming back home, and it would be a pretty good fit. And so I thought, given what the Jets would need, Tanev made a lot of sense. But unfortunately, the Jets did not bring him in. He's going to the Dallas Stars with half of his salary retained. And what the Stars gave up, relatively speaking, was pretty cheap, right? So they gave up a second-round pick. They have a conditional third-round pick and a prospect, Artem Grushnikov, who's kind of like in that mid-tier, I would say like a B-level prospect, maybe even a C+, something in that range. So nothing particularly crazy here. And I feel like if you're the Calgary Flames and you're a Flames fan, I'm sorry. I feel like you kind of got hosed. Not exactly a great return, and I think if you're the Jets, you're also kind of looking at this and wondering, might this have been one of our best chances to come away with a relatively inexpensive upgrade on the back end? Now, Tanev does have like one or two, I would say, challenges to work around. The first is that he's more of a defensive presence, which is fine, right? He's a shutdown player, he's great, and he's actually pretty competent at moving the puck. That said, he probably would have been the last major acquisition the Jets would make. So if Winnipeg is trying to do more than just one defender, maybe they're holding off and looking at more of like a package deal, right? I think the Jets could very much be into looking for both a forward and a defender, and maybe they're trying to do sort of a one-stop shopping situation, which I can respect. It's not the worst if they get the right targets. But looking at this, I think for the Jets, the Tanev deal is both bad news and some minor good news. The bad news, right off the bat, Winnipeg is now going to face an even tougher Dallas Stars. And of course, this trade would happen the day before Winnipeg is set to face Dallas. Now, the good news for the Jets is that they're not going to be taking on the Stars with Tanev until later on, because Tanev's probably going to need some time to get a work visa. And, that's not going to happen overnight. So for tomorrow's game, at least, we're going to see the same Stars lineup that we've generally seen the first couple of times earlier this year. I guess another piece of good news is that, given the price of what Dallas paid, the market for defenders and stuff might be relatively inexpensive. The Jets were probably thinking of Sean Walker. I know that the Flyers and Jets have really been heavily scouting each other recently, to the point where the Jets have even had multiple Jet scouts at the same Flyers game. So they've been flirting back and forth. We know that they're doing probably some back-end discussions and stuff. And For the Jets, that could be not the worst outcome, right? You suddenly find yourself in a much more affordable price bracket for Sean Walker. Now, Matt Dumba has also been a bit of a peripheral trade target, apparently, and Arizona was asking a first. That's obviously not going to happen anymore, but regardless of what the Jets could potentially pay for Dumba, I was very much in the camp of wanting to steer clear of that, right? I think, Tanev for me would have been a much better fit. Walker is a much better player. I can very much pass on Dumba at this stage of his career. If it was a few years ago, I might feel a little bit differently about it. But where Dumba is right now in his trajectory and everything, I just don't really feel like he's actually an upgrade that the Jets would get a lot of value out of. Unless Bones really surprises me and somehow Dumba really turns it around under his tutelage. But at this point, I think you've got more sure options. I don't want to take too many gambles on hoping for some reclamation stuff when you're really looking for clear upgrades, right? The Jets already kind of gambled and have actually gotten pretty nicely like a good return out of Sean Monahan already. But the amount of times that you can take those stabs and hope that maybe a player who's a little bit more on the fringier side of performances is going to repeat and do really well, you don't want to keep doing that. You want to probably pay some assets for some more sure upgrades. And for the Jets, that's where, at least in some regards, the Tanev deal does help the market. I think that was also one of the biggest things really holding up the rest of the trade market. So after this, we're probably going to see dams burst. Apparently, the Oilers and the Preds are in discussions, might be around Alexander Carrier, which we've talked about as a player the Jets might be interested in. Maybe Novak somehow gets included in that. I don't think that's really likely. I think Carrier would probably be it. But, for the Jets, obviously, there's still plenty of options. And I think Winnipeg, has all of the tools at its disposal, relatively speaking. I know they've already given up their first rounder this year, but if teams are not that high on this draft, it might not matter that much because Winnipeg still has a very high second rounder from Montreal. And they've also got next year's first rounder. So it's not like Winnipeg is really tied to the mast with these assets. The Jets have other stuff that they can look at. Colby Barlow, Elias Salamanson, Brad Lambert, Chaz Lucius, players like that. They've got prospects and stuff to move. So I'm not gonna overreact to the Jets not getting Tanev. Am I a bit disappointed? Yeah, and I think it really sucks that he's going to one of our stiffest division rivals, and really the team now that might be the favorite to emerge out of the West. I know Vancouver's kicking butt and really doing well. But I would say out of all the teams that really frighten me the most, Dallas might be one of the scariest because they're really built from top to bottom to be very deep. And we'll talk about, how their lineups are looking later this episode and what the Jets can expect in tomorrow's game. I suppose the one saving grace is that they don't have elite goaltending right now. So maybe that is going to be the big equalizing force should the Jets encounter them in the postseason. But like I said, I have a couple of trade targets in mind that I'm really kind of honing in on now, and we'll talk about which ones are really topping my list in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at GameTime. Obviously, when it comes to buying tickets and everything, we all know how it can be a bit of an expensive process, right? You get hit with surprise charges. You find yourself on the outside looking in for really good seats. Sometimes websites just flat out crash, and it can be a really painful and annoying process. GameTime knows how much of a pain it is, and I'm sure they've been in the same boat themselves when they were looking for tickets. I know personally, I've used all sorts of services. It honestly just gets tiresome, right? You run into the same problems, and you want to avoid all the hassle. GameTime offers a one-stop shop with great killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and they even offer views from where you're sitting, so you actually know what you're paying for, right? You're going to see whether you have an obstructed view or not, and you can actually get some of the lowest prices in the industry. GameTime also offers a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. They know all of the same struggles that we go through. They want to make an all-inclusive, one-stop, price that you see is what you pay. They don't want to hit you with surprise charges and stuff. And they also are offering some really cool specials for our listeners. If you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase at GameTime. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. While we're at it, I also wanted to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. I'm going to say that, honestly, I'm not as big of a basketball fan as I am for most other sports. I'll tune in for the playoffs, right? I know some of the biggest names, Wembanyama, Jokic, of course, Curry still hanging around, LeBron's still out there. But, for a lot of you who really get excited about basketball, FanDuel is a way to take your fandom to the next level and also turn your love of the game into something really fun and perhaps a big smashing win if you can actually get your predictions right. All you have to do to get started is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. You might even hit a mid-court jumper. Who's to say, right? FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are taking a look around the league after, the landscape has changed trade market-wise. The Chris Tanev deal has probably signaled the start of what's about to be a very big avalanche of trades over the next several days, because obviously the trade deadline is rolling up next week. Should be a good time for the Jets to kind of consolidate their last few moves and really push this team forward, because I feel like Winnipeg is really looking for something a little bit more than just Monahan. And a defender probably was at or near the top of that list. We'll talk about who kind of makes the most sense from a couple of teams that I'm really closely eyeing up. But before we get into that, just wanted to shout out something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And we're also now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app and YouTube. Now, circling back to the Jets, obviously Winnipeg, probably not super thrilled that Tanev is going to the Stars, but at the end of the day, maybe the Jets are sort of, resigned to it. Maybe they weren't really interested in adding him. I don't know. Winnipeg has kind of been playing it very close to the vest in terms of what their trade targets are, who they're really interested in, and we're only getting some sense of what Jets are or what the Jets are targeting either through the media or also through who they're scouting. And Winnipeg's going to be playing the field pretty broadly, right? Winnipeg has cast a wide net, but there's one team that they seemingly keep coming back to, and a team that has really come back to the Jets as well. It's got to be the Philadelphia Flyers. And the Flyers, I know people are kind of looking at them as a playoff contender. I think everyone who has honestly assessed where they are this year and what kind of team they are is aware that, honestly, Philadelphia is not really a contender, right? This team is, I would say, of the bunch, pretty middling. They're kind of one of those teams that's on the nice border of being decent, but also not great enough to really put a lot of stock into. And so the Jets have a real interesting dilemma here where, you're going to have to convince Philadelphia to part with at least one or two players, right? There's a couple of guys that they've got, for a couple of seasons, and maybe they think next year they're going to be stronger. But I don't know. I look at this team and I see a squad that's kind of in a stage of needing to start the rebuild process. I think they have some players who are locked up longer term that maybe they want to do more like a retooling, right? And I think that's totally cool. I could see the Jets having a number of prospects like Barlow and company that would be a really big fit for this organization because they're probably looking for strong voices. They're probably looking for good consummate pros, and they've got some players and stuff that other teams would be interested in. And if I'm the Jets, I'm really trying to go after Sean Walker and Travis Konechny. I know I've talked about them before several times as major targets. I feel like of the players that you could possibly acquire here, they might be among the most interesting. Now, I think the problem is that Konechny's got another year on his deal, and that's going to make his price pretty expensive. But I think if you're the Jets and you think that the 2-year window really does make the most sense, then you should go for it, right? This is probably a good trade partner. They seem to be interested in the Jets prospects. My only concern is that they might start targeting guys like Lambert and Chibrikov, who are among our top prospects. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about that unless we're really getting into like Sanheim territory or Konechny territory, maybe even Morgan Frost. So those are, some really good forward, or in Sanheim's case, a top-end blue liner who's locked up for a good long while. In terms of rentals, Sean Walker is obviously going to be the D that would make the most sense. None of the other blue liners really interest me. I think the Jets would do well to make Walker kind of their lower end depth target. Now, Sean would immediately be, I would say, one of our better defenders overall. I think he'd probably rank behind Dylan. So you have like Morrissey, maybe like number 4, right? I think you'd have him just behind Brendan Dillon. Dillon's game has really expanded this year, so Walker would probably, sit around in that tier, which is great, right? I think he'd be a nice depth add based on the Tanev market, maybe not too expensive, which would be good for the Jets. But of course, if Winnipeg is really going for it and trying to acquire another player, maybe you can get a Konechny or a Frost. Frost would be sick. I don't know that the Flyers are necessarily interested in moving Morgan, but as an RFA who would be due up for extension a couple years from now and is young, plays down the middle, and can also play out wide and brings a lot of offensive skill, I think the Jets would be crazy not to at least investigate the question, right? Ask, see what happens, and go from there. The other team, though, aside from the Flyers, that really has caught my eye and that I've been thinking a lot more about is Washington, right? The Caps are definitely at a stage where, quite honestly, they're at the end of the Ovechkin era, and they've got a lot of money that they could probably do without. Let's be honest, they probably would love to move a couple of these contracts off the books, and one guy who would make a perfect addition to the Jets is Anthony Mantha. Mantha is a rental. He's only got this year left, and then he's a free agent, which would be interesting in terms of trying to bring him back potentially. But if you're just using him for a rental, I think that's awesome. Mantha could also be packaged with another defender, right? I've heard some discussions from folks interested in maybe Trevor Van Riemsdyk. TVR is a nice two-way defender with some really solid defensive impacts. I don't know what his season this year has been like, but this is mostly historical, right? TVR has generally been a really nice two-way defender, and that has kind of been much of the story of his career as a quality second pairing player. Somebody who's kind of been maybe not like shutdown territory like Tanev is, but still a big enough upgrade to where you'd notice it over somebody like Neil Pionk. One other guy that would be of interest to me is Ethan Bear. Bear just signed this year, and I don't know how interested he'd be in coming to Winnipeg, but given that the Caps are definitely rebuilding and Bear offers some nice offensive versatility, I'd be very interested in knowing if he'd be up for potentially moving to the Jets. He doesn't have any trade protection, so that's not really the question. It's just, would Winnipeg want him? And I think if you get a package involving him or TVR and you bring in Mantha, you've got at least some term on either one of Bear and Van Riemsdyk, and maybe Mantha ends up signing a more team-friendly deal. I don't know. It's tough to say, right? We all know how free agents are, but Mantha could honestly do with finding a place where he can sort of kind of lock it down and stick around for a while. And maybe the Jets would be able to be that team for him, which, we saw Niederreiter do this. We saw Scheifele and Hellebuck lock up. So maybe Mantha would be interested in hanging around Winnipeg at a reasonable cost. I don't know. All stuff to consider, but in terms of like two teams that make a lot of sense for the Jets to be engaging in trade conversations with, I'd be looking at those two first. There's tons of other trade targets. We'll probably have more thoughts on this over the next few weeks because, or next week or so, because obviously the trade deadline is rolling up here very soon, and Winnipeg has a lot of, I guess, irons in the fire. That's always their favorite phrase, but let's just hope they pick the right one and come away with an absolute winner, because I think the Jets probably need at least two more acquisitions before we can really feel comfortable about their Stanley Cup odds. But of course, the Jets have some immediate business to take care of. They're about to face one of the toughest teams out there that's been on a little bit of a goaltending slump recently in the Dallas Stars. We'll talk about what the Jets can expect and what we might see in tomorrow's game in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are preparing, for what's going to be a busy next few days. Obviously, the Jets are probably heavily involved in the trade market, but before then, they already have a very tough test against a team that honestly might be one of the favorites to emerge out of the Western Conference. This is a team that the Jets are directly contending for the Central Division crown with, and that is the Dallas Stars. And Dallas, I know that they're slumping recently, but I promise you this team legit scares me. They're one of the best in the West. They're one of the best teams in the league, period. And when you look at their roster and lineup, you're starting to see why they honestly really, for me, intimidate a lot of teams, right? Now, I think the Jets are probably better equipped to handle this particular squad than most. The last couple of games the Jets played were surprisingly close run affairs where the main difference was the power play, right? Special teams kind of split the difference. But of course, this team is also now bringing back Miro Heiskanen. He'll actually be in this game. And there's a new addition that's going to be a real pest for the Jets, and that is Logan Stankoven. So let's talk about the lineups, because I feel like this team is just on paper one of the deepest teams I've really seen out there. You've got Jason Robertson, Rope Hintz, and Pavelski on the first line. Second line is Marchment, Duchesne, and somebody else. Might be Sam Steele, could be Stankoven, hard to say. Then on the third line, you've got Ben, Johnston, and Stankoven. On the fourth, Delandria, maybe somebody gets double shifted, and Craig Smith. You've got a lot of interesting players here. Radek Faksa also kind of pops in here and there. So overall, right, this team is pretty deep, pretty scary, and this is with Sagan still missing time. So you look at this lineup and you realize there's not a lot of like a lot of weaklings, right? Up front, they're deep, they're talented, and they have a lot of scoring prowess. And you've got their defense as well. You've got Harley and Heiskanen, Lindell, and eventually Tanev when he slots in, Suter and Hakanpää. Just not a lot that I would say is really of concern to them, right? In terms of, areas where this team is deficient. The one thing, though, that really has kind of bitten them recently is the goaltending. Ottinger has not really had a particularly great year. And while Wedgwood has generally been pretty good, they've conceded quite a few goals. Dallas and Colorado, for as good as they've been this year, have conceded very high numbers of goals against, which is pretty funny because they're both teams that are considered some of the tops in the Western Conference. And then you look at the Jets, and Winnipeg has conceded only 135 goals the entire season, which, just for reference, the next lowest amount conceded is the Florida Panthers, who are sort of at the very top of the East, and they've conceded 142 goals. So both teams very stingy, obviously. But for the Jets, right, the big thing that's going to be a little bit, much to handle is that Dallas offense. At even strength, they've got a ton of depth. On the power play, they've got a menacing unit. And we saw how good their puck movement was in the last games where, the Jets would get caught in transition and then Dallas would essentially kill the game off, right? Once they had a lead, it was very hard to break them down. So Winnipeg, crucially, needs to get an early lead. What is kind of nice is that the Jets have been on a huge hot streak in net. Hellebuck continues to run very, very hot. Laurent Brossoit has been very, very hot. Whoever gets the nod, of course, it'll be Hellebuck. But if anything goes wrong, you still have an amazing backup to rely upon. And just thinking about this game, I think this will be a very closely matched one. I think this could be a divisional matchup preview for later in the postseason, right? Now, what is kind of funny is Dallas and the Jets are tied in points, but guess what? The Jets have 4 games in hand. So Winnipeg has kind of been killing it enough lately to where they're firmly in the driver's seat for this division. They've played the fewest amount of games in the entire Central. The next closest is 58 games, which is one more than what the Jets have played. But Winnipeg, obviously with the teams that are actually fighting for the title, they have a lot of games in hand. They're on a 4-game winning streak, and they are maybe not playing the best hockey of this entire season. But you know what? Anything can happen, and I think it would be great for this to be the time when Winnipeg breaks through and beats Dallas. They've lost twice this year to the Stars. It'd be nice if the Jets can come away with a huge road victory. I'd like to also see the top line really perform, because I feel like for as much as they've scored in some of these games, they've generally been outchanced almost every evening, even against teams that are like rebuilders, right? That's just not sustainable. That has to change, and I really want to see improvement from the Pionk pairing as well, because like Dylan's been doing his bit. He had a really good game last time out, and Pionk generally kept a lot of his mistakes to a minimum, but the Stars are a different experience, right? This is going to be a tough Dallas team. This is going to be a hard road game, and sometimes when you have these like really daunting matchups, that's when the Jets have stepped up in a mighty ways. So let's hope for a good game. I'm going to say if the Jets do win, it's probably going to be like 4-3. I think it's going to be really, really close. Thankfully, the Jets' power play is finally scoring again, so maybe that's going to be the dividing difference, but we'll see, right? All I know is that this is going to be one of the, I would say, measuring stick kind of games, right? Dallas, strong team, a little bit uneven the past few games, but still a very scary opponent, and one that you're likely to start to think about for the playoffs in a few weeks. But the Jets, good opportunity. Let's get those 2 points and further cement Winnipeg's chance to win the Central Division. But let me know how you're feeling about some of these trade opportunities. Do you think the Chris Tanev package was fair? Do you wish the Jets had paid that price? Who else really fits the billing? And do you think either the Flyers or the Caps make the most sense as trade partners? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Stay tuned tomorrow for thoughts on the game against Dallas, hoping to report a victory. But like I said, that is all the time that we have for tonight. As always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. See you tomorrow, and go Jets go.